Hello, my lovelies. I'm Jenny O, the author with no last name, and today let's talk about werewolves. I love werewolves, so this should be obvious. They're in both of my book series. I got a comment on a video that kind of broke containment here about being some werewolf expert, heavy on the sarcasm. And I don't actually claim to be an expert on werewolves, mostly because I did enough research about werewolves so I could write my book and then kind of moved on. Um, so there is this theory that I came across while I was in college and kind of this writing fantasy magazine that floated that werewolves were not as popular as vampires because werewolves don't have a core defining origin story like Dracula. And if you're interested in the origins of vampires and Dracula, Ask the Mortician did a really good video about vampires, and I strongly recommend you go watch it. Now, the reason why I don't call myself an expert is because, and that this video is sitting here in my room, is because I don't have the money or the means to hop a plane to Europe and fly all over the place and interview people and, you know, look for really old books and beautiful libraries that deal with the original extant sources that about werewolves that we can find. So the difference between vampires and werewolves is, it is very true. Werewolves are a lot older than vampires in, you know, in the cultural kind of zeitgeist thing, and there aren't a consistent story on how werewolves come to be anywhere in history. And what really fascinates me as a person studying werewolves on my own free time, because I like them, is how our culture, the culture of the different time periods, kind of shaped our views about werewolves. The first kind of recorded story about werewolves is actually found in the Bible, or the Old Testament, the Talmud. And it's about how God cursed the Persian king Nebuchadnezzar to be a wolf. And you're going, wasn't Nebuchadnezzar the one who freed the Hebrews from slavery? There was a lot of Nebuchadnezzars. Nebuchadnezzar's a ruling name, kind of like Xerxes and Artaxerxes among the Persians. So the Persians would have this king, there'd be this little war, a coup, whatever happened, and the next guy would come sit on the throne and he would take a ruling use name such as Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus and Darius were also interchangeable ruling names. So, like the Egyptians, there you go. So Nebuchadnezzar was cursed by God to either be a wolf or be like a wolf, depending on your translation. And so you have two choices here. Nebuchadnezzar was either running around in his gardens as an actual animal and hunting prey and all that, or the more hysterical version of he had lost all his human reasoning, you know, his ability to talk and everything, and he was running around in his gardens, snapping his human teeth at deer and everything, and talk about just embarrassing, you know, not wanting to put on clothes, being dirty, you know, having the dirt on him, washing in the stream type of thing, and his poor servants, kind of. So he was a like a wolf for a set period of time, which I believe was 7 years, and then he was restored to either the shape of a man or the facilities of a man, and he was a much more humble king and man afterwards. So that is our first kind of a recorded instance of a man turning into a wolf, or a werewolf, lycanthropy. So then, the next thing that we saw was the Romans. There was a group of people who lived by the Caspian Sea. And the Romans, being the Romans, decided to march out and conquer everybody, including these people. And they get there, and they basically accuse them of being able to turn into wolves. And the people were like, yes, we are very proud of this. We are descended from wolves. We are wolf-type men. It's even on our standards. We are so glad you noticed. Because in Roman times, the idea that you were acting like an animal was severely frowned on. The idea was, if you are a Roman citizen, you are civilized. And if you are not a Roman citizen, you aren't educated, you got a beard, and it is quite possible that you turn into an animal or have, congress with animals. And it was a very bad thing. So this kind of point of view, this cultural point of view, went on into what we call the Dark Ages after the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, after they overextended themselves and collapsed. They just didn't have enough money, and they withdrew all their armies. So we don't have a lot of written type of things from this Dark Ages time periods between 900 to the end of the 1300s. We don't have a lot of that. There was a lot that survived. What was going on at the time was a lot of monastic tradition, so all the books were either kept in monasteries or were be written by monks, and when the monastic tradition then later collapsed, the books either went into big private libraries or they were destroyed. Or they're written in a language nobody speaks anymore, like Anglo-Saxon. So a lot of what we had of written of that time period before the printing press is just kind of been lost to the mists of time. But what we do know from, oral traditions is that this whole concept of, if you act like an animal, it is bad, continued through the Dark Ages. So the whole concept was, it's actually okay to be a werewolf. You can be a werewolf. You can turn into a wolf or whatever, just as long as you don't act like an unreasoning animal and, indulge in gluttony. In fact, one of the very few written pieces of information is from around the 1100s, when they were doing the sumptuary laws. Yes, they tried to do a law that says what you can wear and what you can do depending on your class, and most of the time that didn't work. But this sumptuary law actually references werewolves, and it said, as long as the werewolf is not blaspheming God, leave them alone. So blaspheming God, what does that precisely mean? Well, if you are blaspheming God, it can kind of be done in two different ways. One, you are putting yourself above God. You think you are greater than God, you're better than God, or you are doing evil works. You are committing murder, stealing, abusing people in the name of God. It's actually one of the 10 sayings, what the Christians call the 10 commandments. It's thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, doing evil works in the name of God. So if you were a werewolf during this period, just as long as you're not blaspheming God, just leave them alone. So what was going on kind of in the culture, and how did you become a werewolf in Dark Ages times? Now, one of the more popular ways to become a werewolf was to be cursed by a priest or your wife, either or. They believed back then that words had power, and if you had enough belief behind your words, you could make curses and poxes come true. It's kind of why they were a little bit more careful about it than we are today. And one of the more popular ones was turning you into a wolf. And so there's two things that could happen after that. So you have the version where if it was like a priest doing it, you had sinned and they're like, I'm turning you into a wolf, now go atone, and once you finish atoning, you'll become a man again. Or So you had stories of these werewolf type men becoming knights errant and helping people during the Crusades, basically, in order to atone for whatever sin the priest had cursed them into being a werewolf for. And then the other version was, you have been cursed to be a wolf for 7 years. 7 was very popular. And basically, go off into the forest, don't kill any humans, and you'll become a man again. And you'll be able to return in 7 years. Easiest curse ever. Sounds like a vacation. To me, okay, I'll run off and be a wolf for 7 years. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. So, it was kind of this way of, I don't know, explaining why you'd been gone for 7 years, maybe. It was just a curse. Then there was other, easier or less easy ways, depending on how you look at it, to become a werewolf. There was actually werewolves who were kind of like silkies. If you had a wolf pelt and you wore the wolf pelt, you could become a werewolf. St. Patrick actually gave last rites to one of these, and the wolf and his dying wife came into his camp and had a full-blown conversation with St. Patrick. And St. Patrick gave her last rites after he opened up her wolf pelt and showed she was a woman underneath the wolf pelt, an old woman. And they went on, then the wolf went on his way with his dead, his dying wife, and never to be seen again. And then there was the other versions, the nature versions, where you would sleep out under the stars for 3 nights under the full moon, okay? The full moon shining on your face for 3 nights in a row could turn you into a werewolf. You could drink water out of a wolf paw print, and that would turn you into a werewolf. Or there was a type of kind of tree, and if it was braided together with a specific type of vine and it had formed an arch, and you went under that arch, you could become a werewolf. So you see, it was kind of easy to become a werewolf back then. And then there was also the kind of out-of-body experience type of werewolf, where they would tell people, if you see a body kind of lying under a hedgerow or, in the woods somewhere, and it's not really moving and it's, hardly breathing, don't touch it, don't do anything. The spirit is just out for a walk as a werewolf, and you don't want to disturb the body for when the spirit comes back. There are some, other kind of tales about werewolves from this period, like the werewolves of Ornkey, who are fishermen. In Norway during this time period, there was a group of wise women who were known to turn into wolves. Um, so there was those type of werewolves up in Norway. But there was also a lot of kind of religious bigotry going on in that time period. And where werewolfism was used to represent that you weren't a Catholic, basically. And you were an uncivilized, unwashed type of person, and once you became a Catholic, you would no longer be a werewolf and you would be a civilized human being with a soul. Culturally, the tales that we have of that time period about wolves come like in two different formats. You have what has been collected into Brothers Grimm, where most of the wolves in those stories are greedy gluttons and they want to eat everything in sight, or they like betray people that they're traveling with. Little Red Riding Hood. Lots of drowning happens in those fairy tales that deal with wolves. That type of thing. And then they also had the animal morality tales. Now, the animal morality tales of the time were very salacious and very depraved. Walt Disney wanted to try to create a movie based on these animal reality tales like he did with Song of the South, and he got to reading them and he realized that they were so salacious and they were so depraved, because a peasant's version of humor back then was very, very crude and very you know, they were poking fun at the clergy and the nobles all the time and these things. So he just could not, for the life of him, find a way to sanitize these tales that involve everything from murder to necrophilia. He had to change course, and he, in fact, turned it into Robin Hood, which is why Robin is a fox, which was seen as clever and manipulative, and yes, a thief who who got one up on the clergy and on the sheriff. And the sheriff in these tales was a wolf who was corrupt and greedy and typical wolf things in that time period. So what was happening during the Dark Ages is that basically werewolves existed for the most part. They left people alone. They were just people trying to live their lives, and they had become a werewolf either through a curse or some sort of mystical means by sleeping outside or, drinking out of a paw print. And as long as they didn't blaspheme God, people were just to leave them alone. This is kind of the same thing what was going on with wolves in that time period. Anyway, I mean, most of the wolves that they would meet are wolves that were sick or starving, so that they would attack you. Most of the times wolves will stay away from human beings, so because they're scared of us as we're scared of them, even though they're much bigger than you think. So most of the wolf interaction they would have would be these wolves who were sick, or these wolves who were starving, or wolves who had figured out the sheep are stupid and let's eat the sheep. So it was during the Dark Ages as well that wolves were hunted to extinction in Britain, and a lot of wolves were kind of pushed back into the deep forests in Europe as well. So that's because, when you have stories of here are your wolves, and there's a wolf in your forest, and it's hurting your shepherds or whatever, and you are a noble person, and you get your sword or you get your spear and you go out and you hunt the wolf and you manage to cut off its paw. Don't ask me how you only got its paw. You get that close to it and you only get its paw. Okay. And you go back to your house and you find your wife in the kitchen trying to bind up her arm because she was the werewolf, the wolf. Usually the story has like two endings from there. And it ends either badly for the wife, who ends up dead, or badly for the nobleman because his wife is like, you cut off my hand, I am taking our child and leaving. So, you know, those were the type of tales going on during that time period. Alright. This is why I don't normally talk about werewolves, because it, like, 20 minutes on going from biblical times to medieval times. So, we haven't even hit the printing press. So, next time, in Let's Talk About Werewolves Part 2, we will start off with the Dark Ages and see how far I get up in through history about werewolves and how culture viewed werewolves at the time. No, I'm still not an expert, but, you know, if you're interested in, you know, looking up more about this yourself, I do recommend starting with Wikipedia, then scrolling to the bottom and going to the sources, and then checking the sources out. There are some very, like I said, it's for this particular time period, it is harder to find information about werewolves because a lot of it was not written down. Okay. Take care of yourselves, my lovelies. Stay safe, bless, and I'll see you in the next video.